In 2019, the Film and Whiskey podcast went on a flight of imagination with eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes.
In 2022, we try 3 whiskeys from a Minnesota producer.
This is The Aviator, The Revisit.
Welcome into the Film and Whiskey podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are revisiting a movie from season 1. Brad, each season we do a kind of special bonus episode.
Bonus? Were you confident in that?
I thought you were going to follow it up with your patented, but no.
Bonus episode.
Each season we do a bonus episode where we rewatch a movie from one of our prior seasons. And in the last few seasons, what we've done is we have gone back and rewatched a movie that, one or both of us gave lower scores to, and wondering if our scores would change at all.
One or both of us. Bob, it was movies that you wanted me to change my mind on.
Let's just be honest here. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So far, you remain...
I lowered one score by a half a point, and I raised the other score by half a point.
So it's a wash.
So I'm net neutral right now.
You have remained obstinate in your inability to reassess things. So what we've done this year instead is say, hey, let's just go back and talk about a movie that we'd really like to watch again. A movie that maybe doesn't get enough traction or that we don't see people talk about enough. And it was actually pretty easy for us to narrow down what movie we wanted to talk about. So we're going back to a season 1 episode. Brad, it was somewhere in our first 8 episodes that we watched Martin Scorsese's The Aviator.
I think it was at number 5.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ever?
No joke. Yeah, this is our 5th episode ever from season 1, which is a land of imagination and dreams.
And not much else.
The sound quality is absolutely amazing.
Poop.
But I will say, Bob, you forced me to go back and re-listen to this episode, and dare I say it might be one of the best episodes we've ever recorded.
Listen, I turned it on in my car, and I was cringing at how bad it sounds, because we didn't know what we were doing. But I gotta say, man, we hit our stride pretty quick when it comes to content and analysis. That was a damn good episode.
Yeah, I was pretty happy with it. And even the best part of season 1, if we're allowed to be self-deprecating, is that we had so little energy with our openings. You would have thought we were Michael Scott trying to deadpan a cold open on The Office. It was rough, man. But right after that, the Film and Whiskey podcast. Right after that, though, dude, this episode was a banger. Yeah. So if you haven't listened to it, go back and give The Aviator a shot. It was a really good episode.
And so much so that I didn't take too many more notes on this movie upon rewatch. I actually think that we can go in some really interesting directions today because I agree with what I said 3 years ago. This is an absolute banger of a movie.
You didn't change your opinion on a movie? How dare you, Bob?
A movie that we both loved, by the way.
Yeah, it was the first movie I gave a 10 out of 10.
So let's start
Bob
there.
wanted it to be Goodfellas. So
let's start there. You kicked off that episode by saying, I feel like this is Martin Scorsese's unsung masterpiece, which was a really bold statement coming from you because I think you'd only seen 2 Martin Scorsese movies at that point in your life.
Yep, 100%. Let's see. I had seen Goodfellas and Silence and...
The Aviator.
The Aviator. So 3, Bob.
3
Thank
movies.
You very much.
And this was the unsung masterpiece of the bunch. But man, listen, I'm still in agreement with you saying that. I think that this movie is it's such a rich text for how to tell a story like this, but also for how Scorsese, as a director, loves to do little homages and tributes and kind of knowing winks to film history. There's so many references crammed into this movie that you only really get from a film by Scorsese. And I just had an absolute blast watching this movie again.
Yeah, this was a movie that I'd been wanting to revisit for quite some time, but It's a little bit of a time commitment.
Mhm.
I think the runtime is like 2 hours and 50 minutes, and they use up just about every second of it. So jumping back into it felt like a bit of a daunting task. But once we had started talking about revisiting it, I was like, this is an obvious choice, because as soon as I sat down, pulled it up, you're just enthralled.
Mm-hmm.
The way Scorsese is able to suck an audience in from the opening seconds of the film is just a skill that is unparalleled by many other directors.
And, we made some comments in our first episode, but I think it bears repeating here that one of the things that's most impressive to me about this film is the way that he uses the medium of filmmaking to put you in the position of Howard Hughes as he enters into, an episode, or I don't know, whatever you want to call it, of OCD. How they do these really interesting things with the lighting, where it becomes really harsh, almost spotlight type lighting on the characters. And sometimes you'll have like a flashbulb effect. And it's really a cue to the audience that he's about to like enter into a state of mental disequilibrium here. But even just the way that they cut scenes together, where they'll cut a few seconds out of a shot to make it more jarring and make it more of a jumpy kind of thing. And it really kind of sits you on edge, and it puts you in this vulnerable, kind of uneasy position. I love that Scorsese uses the format of the movie to get that point across.
Well, and what I really love is that so much of this movie is just the camera is just glued on Leo, right? That he is in nearly every single scene. I love the way, in my mind, so much of the movie is filmed smooth. Like the camera movement is not showy. It's not over the top. He's not doing a bunch of crazy stuff. One of the few times he does like a really showy camera movement is when they're in the little theater that he has built at his house or his offices or wherever he is. And they pull back and you see bottle after bottle of his own urine. But like, other than that, it's a very smooth, simple camera movement throughout the movie, except for those moments of pressure and of difficulty for Howard. And at that point, you jump into the fast-paced, cameras flashing, you see Leo blinking, like he's not just trying to blink the light away, he's trying to blink the stress away. And it's just such a cool way to use the camera that you can't do that with other directors. There's not many people who can do that in a way that Scorsese does.
All right, so I think one of the fun things about these episodes is that we get to we get to revisit, but we get to jump back in and find little things that we didn't notice the first time around. So let's just kind of go into that, Brad, because I took a few notes of just really fun things that I either didn't make mention of in the first episode or that I didn't notice on the first watch through. What kind of jumped out to you this time?
I liked Katie a little bit more.
Hey, a Katharine Hepburn fan.
She was a little bit more sympathetic of a character this time around.
Yeah, I think
that
last time you really dug your heels in on that scene where she breaks up with him.
Yeah, dude, she was a B.
Nah, I still disagree,
and
like wholeheartedly.
I'm not like backing down from that. I think the thing that hurts so much for me is the trust that she built up with him. I think what helped me understand it a little bit more is you really do get a picture of how Howard is just insanely difficult to live with.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he is not an easy person to be around for an extended period of time. And I think I appreciated that a little bit more this time through.
Excuse me? Well, if you're deaf, you must own up to it. Get a hearing aid, or see my father. He's a urologist, but it's all tied up inside the body, don't you find? Me, I keep healthy. I take 7 showers a day to keep clean. Also, because I'm what's so vulgarly referred to as outdoorsy. Well, I'm not outdoorsy, I'm athletic. I sweat. There it is. Now we both know the sordid truth. I sweat, and you're deaf. Aren't we a fine pair of misfits?
One of the few moments in the movie where they really slow down and there's no music, there's no sound effects, is that scene after he crashes into the beet field and he comes home and she's kind of cleaning his wounds in the bathroom. And she has this really vulnerable moment where she's talking about how her brother committed suicide. And she starts talking about the press and how they're constantly kind of encroaching on people like them because of their celebrity and their fame. And in a way, it really, I mean, it's coming from a completely different place. Like, it's a much healthier understanding of the relationship between the press and celebrity. But she's using the same kind of language that Howard kind of internalizes, which is that he's constantly paranoid and he's thinking that people are listening to him and they're trying to sneak things into his food and all that. And I think that scene is so brilliant because even though I think Howard misinterprets her, right, that he kind of thinks that she's like him, it still kind of paints her as different from all these other girls that Howard dates throughout the movie, whether it's this like young teenager that he's grooming, which is a very different, another subplot for another day, or, you know, Ava Gardner. And I remember in our first episode, Brad, you were kind of asking like, I don't really understand the Ava Gardner character. Why is she with him? And even though she's very helpful to Howard at different points in the movie, I think that scene with Katharine Hepburn really solidifies, like, if there's one person on Earth who understands him, it's Katharine Hepburn.
Yep. And that's why it makes her betrayal all the much more worse. Because I'm with you, man. I think that the relationship with Katie is what really grounds him as a human being. It gives him purpose in life. You know, even after they break up, he kind of rouses himself out of a stupor in order to protect her, to buy those pictures from the journalist, if you want to call him that. And so you see him descend so much more quickly once that relationship is removed. And that's what makes her so hard for me. Like, I think I understood her more, but it still just hurts because I like Howard.
Right.
I really like him as a character.
Well, I think I'm really glad you mentioned that idea of him kind of like pulling himself out of whatever funk he gets in, because that is kind of
out of his Willet funk.
Out of his Willet funk. There's a couple of those movements throughout the movie, and one of them is after, you know, she breaks up with him, and one of them is towards the end of the film where he has really kind of fallen apart and he's locked himself in his screening room, and then he has to come out so that he can go to these congressional hearings. And he freaking kills it. But then, you know, even after that, it's like, this business is unfinished. I have to prove to myself and I have to prove to everybody else that this airplane, the Hercules, can fly. And I really love the decision of Scorsese and especially the screenwriter, John Logan, to make that kind of the ending point of the movie, because it works as such a great and kind of obvious metaphor for like what he was doing with his life, which was, you know, I have to find something to keep me going, to keep me, for lack of a better word, kind of sane. And he flies that big old plane and it's sitting there in the bay, and he still has this breakdown at the end of the movie. And it's this tip off to the audience of like, there is never anything that is big enough to keep him from descending back into the depths of this debilitating disorder. And you're looking at the biggest thing to ever fly, ever. And that wasn't enough. And I think it just works as such a great visual metaphor. At one point, he's starting to have his breakdown, and they're like literally under the shadow of the wing of the airplane. And Scorsese cuts back to this extremely wide shot. So you get the whole airplane in the shot as well. It's just a brilliant little touch. And I noticed a lot more of those kind of visual metaphors this time around.
Finding a director who knows how to use wide shots where you just have a ton of stuff in one picture and use those shots well to really illustrate what the characters is going through is just brilliant. And you're right. This whole idea of, you know, what they termed the spruce goose, when it finally takes off, it is this emotionally triumphant moment. But I think what the ensuing breakdown goes to show is that it's this beautiful metaphor in my mind for the fact that there's not many things on this earth that can truly satisfy the human soul. That, you know, it's illustrated more obviously for someone with OCD, but I think it's something that all audience members can reflect on and identify with, this idea of like, yeah, every time I make a new purchase, it satisfies for a minute, but not for a lifetime. Every time I date somebody new or get a new job or make more money or buy a new car, it never lasts forever. You descend back into that self-doubt, that uncertainty of life of, well, will this new thing be enough? And I think that that's something that this movie does really well. And you're right. It's not something I maybe thought about the first time through, but this time I found myself identifying with the Howard Hughes character all the more.
But the bats do.
I'll bet.
Oh, that's such... Oh, speak up, dear.
Nothing, Mrs. Hepburn, nothing.
Then why did you speak? I can't abide people who speak but have nothing to say.
Did you go to mechanic school to learn all this, airplane guff?
No, I didn't, Letty, no.
Well, Howard just flew around the world in 3 days,
I think
don't
we've
you know?
had enough about airplanes. And dogs, apparently. Had a
Well, then how'd you make all that money?
Dachshund.
We don't care about money here, Mr. Hughes.
Well, that's because you have it.
Would you repeat that?
You don't care about money because you've always had it.
Well, then how did you make all
Excuse
that?
me, I'm speaking.
Well, and at the same time, I found myself kind of in awe of the filmmaking of Scorsese here. There's other elements at play here. This movie won the Oscar for Best Cinematography, and I think, like, very rightfully so. Like, just beautiful cinematography. I thought the sound design in this movie was impeccable. Like, I watched this on the TV that I have upstairs with the surround sound and the subwoofer, and man, oh man, did they do such a great job of, like, amplifying specific sounds that get on Leo's nerves throughout the movie, and it just increases that sense of, like, uneasiness. And then there's, like, little things that Scorsese does where he's putting you in Howard's shoes, even at the very beginning of the movie where he's at, like, the Coconut Grove or wherever they are. And he's sitting at the table with Katharine Hepburn and Adam Scott's character and Jude Law playing Errol Flynn. And Errol Flynn reaches across the table and eats one of his peas. And it just sets him off. Like, he's completely disgusted, right?
Dude.
And I think you'll probably know
so
what I'm going to
good,
say
man.
here. They show his plate, and his plate has a steak that is cooked well done. There's no pink in that steak. And they cut away to Leo's face, and then they cut back to the plate from Leo's point of view, and the steak is bloody as hell. It's like leaking blood everywhere. And it's just demonstrating he thinks this thing is tainted now. He thinks it's contagious. He thinks it's, like, going to harm him. And I just love that he gives you two completely different points of view on that, specifically to put you in the exact same state of uneasiness that Howard's in.
Dude, that was literally one of the things I noticed. I was like, did I just miss that the first time? But, like, yeah, his steak is completely cooked through to a point where steaks just should not be well done. It's not good. But that transition, you see all the peas out of order. You know, they're in their, like, 3x3 pattern. They're all pushed out of order. And there's just blood running down the plate. And it's one of the most powerful moments of the movie that you probably don't even notice until you've watched it multiple times. And I think that's, like, it's little things like that where you're like, this is a 2 hour and 50-minute movie. And yet that 10-second sequence is a freaking masterpiece of its own.
Oh,
like,
there's so many little touches that are, like, that reward you on the rewatch. Like, the scene where Hepburn finally kind of, like, seduces him into bed, and they show her bare back, and his hand is running up her spine, basically. And they do an immediate match cut to Hughes in the airplane hangar running his hand along the rivets of the plane. And I'm just like, Scorsese, you clever bastard. Like, it was so good. Like, it made me grin.
Are you sure he shouldn't have, like, cut to a scene of fireworks being shot off on the French Riviera
from To Catch a Thief, right?
Yeah.
All right, Brad, I think that this is a good place to hit pause. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about why we think this movie hasn't caught on the way that it should have. I think that'll be a fun conversation. But before we get there, let's try these 3 whiskeys from Crooked Water. What do you say?
Let's get to it.
All right, so today we are checking out 3 whiskeys from Crooked Water Spirits. This is based in Minnesota. The whiskey is actually distilled for them in Wisconsin, and it says that right on their label, which I really appreciate. It says the name of the distillery that makes it for them. So it's sourced, but it's, kind of like proprietary for them. We are going to be trying 3 different whiskeys from them today. One is a double-barreled bourbon, one is a rye, one is a bourbon finished in port casks. Brad, I think we should start with the standard bourbon called Old Hell Roaring. It is a double-barreled straight bourbon whiskey, comes in at 90 proof, which is really surprising to me. And Brad, because we have 3 whiskeys here, we're not going to give like a ton of tasting notes here. I think sometimes the distilleries, when they give us these products, they're listening into our podcast to get like a little sound bite. And if you are the distillery, if you're Crooked Water, first of all, thank you. But secondly, here's your sound bite. This is one of the best 90 proof whiskeys I've ever had in my life. That's the sound bite. Brad, I am freaking blown away with this whiskey. It has so much spice and so much depth of character and oak going on. Again, it says it's double barreled, so I imagine it has like a double oaked thing going on here. It has that sort of complexity and character that I love in a Woodford Reserve double oak, but it's coming from a craft distiller. I was not expecting this, and especially at 90 proof. Like, I gave some to my wife. She couldn't believe it was 90 proof because it's just so much more complex. It has such a rich mouthfeel. Man, I don't even really want to give tasting notes. I just want to go on praising this thing. It's so good.
Yeah, season 5 has been like the international season. We've been all over the globe when it comes to whiskeys, to the point where I took a sip of this and I was like, holy crap, it has been a while since I just had a spectacular bourbon. Like this one, for me, it was big, bold, rich. There was a ton of caramel on the nose. Mm-hmm. And then when you get into it, it's a little bit of a thin mouthfeel, which you'd expect from a 90 proof. But there is all sorts of, like you said, spiciness, leather. For me, there's a little bit of like a creamy orange-sicle, like a creamsicle kind of feel to it. This is just a really beautiful whiskey, a nice soft finish that just like lingers on the palate for a while. Like you said, Bob, at 90 proof, Old Hell Roaring is one of the best whiskeys I've ever had.
Yeah, for me, I get a lot of red apple peel on this as well. Like, it's not really prominently apple, but I say apple peel because it just kind of has like a little bit of the scent on it and just a little bit of the flavor, but it stays a little more earthy. I'm really blown away with this. And the crazy thing is, like, as much as I love this, Brad texted me right before we hit record here and was like, dude, this rye is amazing. So I'm going to let you take over here on the Regatta Rye, Brad.
Yeah, man, this one is coming in at 95 proof. I was blown away, Bob, because this is only aged for a minimum of 2 years, which in general can sometimes lead to good results. We've always said that rye just matures more quickly than bourbon. You don't need as much time in the barrel. But oh my gosh, dude, it's spicy. I got clove and baking spices. And then once you move from the nose into actually drinking it, it just transformed into this incredibly smooth, creamy, almost like a spicy caramel. Like, I remember a long, long time ago, one of my students, when I was a youth pastor, was selling popcorn. And he sold me a spicy bacon caramel popcorn that literally, I remember eating it and I'm like, oh, that's like really good, like almost savory caramel popcorn. There's that bacon flavor, the caramel. And then like 10 seconds after eating it, boom, all the spice hit you. It was one of the coolest experiences in the world. And that is exactly what I got with this Regatta Rye.
I will say, of the 3, this one has a little bit more youth to it than the other ones do. Like, I do get a little bit more raw grain. This one is also finished in rum casks, and I think there is some of that really interesting rum character going on here as well. I'm wondering if that might also be playing like kind of against the rye and making the rye seem a little bit more grainy, a little bit more bitter to me. But the thing is, man, like you said, at 2 years, this is pretty spectacular. Like, I do wish it was like a 4-year rye, but for what you're getting at 2 years, really, really good stuff.
Yeah, and then the third one that they sent us is called Kings Point. Now, this is a bourbon that is finished in port wine barrels. It's coming in at 90 proof. It's aged for at least 2 years, I would assume. Bob, this one for me, it falls into the range of like solid port finished bourbon. It didn't blow me away, but it definitely would garner I would recommend it. There's caramel, there's a little bit of grape on the nose, little bits of spice on the palate. And then I think for me, the finish is where this one really stood out. I just had this taste of vanilla and maple that just lingered for a really long time after I finished drinking this. This one was smooth. It was incredibly delicious. I liked this one a lot. Not quite as much as the other two, but it's definitely up there.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that I really struggled to place the fruity note I was getting on this because it wasn't like a very like overly sweet, juicy fruit note. And so I was thinking like, okay, it's coming from port, so maybe it's a grape character, but it wasn't sour enough to be a grape. And so I'm like, what is this? I kept asking my wife to nose it with me, and I'm thinking like, there's something here. Is it like a vanilla wafer? Is it like a graham cracker? But it also smells like it has some sort of like baked fruit put on top of it. And the closest thing I could get on the nose and on the palate is that I got a really great note of fig Newton on this. Like it had that, the fig is almost grape-like, but still kind of in that like more muted realm. And then you get the really great kind of like cookie flavor around that as well. I really, really liked the finish on this. I wonder what it would be like if they took this double barrel and then they put that in the port, because I feel like that would really round out a lot more nicely than what we have here. If I had to rank these though, Brad, I think I would go with the double barrel, the Old Hell, the finished one, and then the rye. Where do you think you would come out?
I don't know which one to pick between the double barrel and the rye. And then King's Point is just barely behind those for me. Honestly, Bob, I'm really just blown away by what they're doing at Crooked Water.
Yeah, like 100%. I'm looking online. There's a couple retailers that carry them, like on TotalWine.com. The Old Hell Roaring is retailing at $47.99, which I think is an absolute steal. I mean, that's cheaper than Woodford Double Oaked, and I think that this is absolutely comparable to that. If you're a fan of like a double barrel kind of smokier bourbon process, like this is a no-brainer recommendation for me, Brad. I really do think this is one of the best whiskeys I've had so far this season.
Yeah, I honestly, Bob, I think we need to get the owner, Heather Manley, on board here at Film and Whiskey. We need to get an interview because she has a company that is just making exceptional spirits.
Well, and shout out to Yahara Bay Distilling in Wisconsin, who's actually doing the distilling for them, because they are putting out some great product here too. So thank you once again, Crooked Water. Man, this has been just a delight of an episode, Brad. We're talking about the Aviator. We're drinking really good whiskey. What do you say we finish out our discussion of this movie?
Let's get to it.
All right, we're getting back into talking about the Aviator. Brad, I don't have too much more to say that wasn't said in our first episode. And I would highly recommend, if you are enjoying this in any way, go back and listen to the Aviator episode, because man, oh man, do we go deep on the word quarantine and its insight into that character. And I think I talked to you a little bit about how it's like his Rosebud, but you hadn't seen Citizen Kane yet, so that reference didn't mean anything to you at the time.
And I was really frustrated for you spoiling, the supposedly greatest movie of all time for me.
Yeah, and now you've seen it. We have come such a long way in 3 years, man.
Yeah, it's wild, man. I mean, have we hit 200 movies altogether?
We're getting close, man. We're going to be at like 150 something at the end of this year.
Okay. Yeah, it's been a wild journey. But honestly, dude, I just want to talk about how the heck does Goodfellas have an 8.7 out of 10 on IMDb and The Aviator only has a 7.5?
Yeah, so I'm not going to parse that out with you because I think Goodfellas is a 10 out of 10. But I do think that one area we can steer this conversation into is like, how the hell did this lose Best Picture to $1 Million Baby? Because we watched $1 Million Baby right around the same time that we watched The Aviator. And I think we came out to like a 7.5 on $1 Million Baby. And this one was a 10 out of 10 from both of us. I remember at the time reading an article about how, for as much as Hollywood is a very self-congratulatory place, that they had never actually rewarded a movie about movie making. And the closest they had ever gotten was in 1950, they gave the award to All About Eve, but it beat out a movie by Billy Wilder called Sunset Boulevard, which was, very famously about Hollywood. And they get really close to rewarding movies like that, but then they don't do it. And it didn't really happen until, in 2011, they gave the award to The Artist, which was very much about movie making. And then in 2012, Argo wins. And so it was like back-to-back years where they broke that streak. But I don't know if that was ever actually on the mind of Oscar voters. Like, we don't want to give an Oscar to a movie about movies. But something had to keep this from winning Best Picture, because it is just, I don't know how anyone could watch these movies back to back and not come away thinking The Aviator is better than $1 Million Baby.
Yeah, I'm with you, dude. $1 Million Baby is a really well-made movie. I like Eastwood as a director there. I think it's one of his better films. The story that it tells is compelling and interesting, but the level of craft when it comes to the dialogue, to how characters are written, to how the stage is set for lighting and camera movement and all these different little things that go into making a movie, The Aviator just flat out does it better. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be like mean or anything. $1 Million Baby just isn't as good of a movie as The Aviator.
No,
period.
And that's okay. Like, it doesn't mean it's a bad movie. And I'm actually kind of finding that to be the case with Scorsese movies in general. Like, the ones that get a lot of acclaim, if I did my own personal rankings, they're not always the ones that I think are his best movies or even my favorites among them. Like, I really love Silence. I think that movie is just incredible, and I hope we do it on the show here at some point, Brad. And I would rank that movie far above The Wolf of Wall Street, which is a much splashier, more attention-grabbing movie. I really think Shutter Island is a masterpiece of Scorsese working inside of a genre. And I would rank that above some of his other films that get a lot more acclaim. And I think this is kind of the same thing, where he was in a phase here where he hadn't quite reascended to the heights that he did with The Departed. But I don't know about you. I think this is a better movie than The Departed. I think it's more well crafted. I think the screenplay is stronger. The Departed has like a couple moments, but it doesn't hold up to scrutiny and to rewatch the way The Aviator does for me.
Dude, I honestly think that Scorsese has a following of bros that really like guns and violence and swearing, and they love Goodfellas, they love The Departed, they love Wolf of Wall Street, for the wrong reasons. And, if not the wrong reasons, they can like the movies for whatever reason they want to. But in my mind, he is much better when he's in places like Silence, like The Aviator. And it just blows my mind that this movie only has a 7.5 on IMDb. $1 Million Baby, I just looked, has an 8.1, which is a pretty big jump on IMDb. Mm-hmm. I don't know, man. What do you think? Like, why do you feel like some of those movies are so much more popular than something like The Aviator? I
mean, at the end of the day, I honestly think $1 Million Baby is a much easier movie to read at surface level. Like, it doesn't, like, there's not much beneath the surface there. Like, there's not much subtext. And that was an issue we had even when we first watched it back in 2019. Like, the character of the mom is very much this caricature of people on welfare and what certain kinds of people think of people who are on government assistance, right? And that movie, it's just, I don't want to say it kind of like bludgeons you, because that's a poor choice of words for what happens in that movie. But like, it really does kind of beat you over the head a little bit with its messaging. And I think it's more smothering than anything else. Yeah, it really trips you neck first into a stool with its messaging. And I think that, it has an incredible twist in it that takes that movie into really dark and morally ambiguous territory. I think it's a really good movie, but I also don't know that there's, like you said, a lot of craft there that rewards you when you go back to it again. And The Aviator is just a movie that, like you said, it's 3 hours long, and I think every scene is an absolute banger. Like, there is not one scene that I actually found to be unnecessary. or like extraneous to the plot of this movie. Everything serves the plot of the movie, and they're all done so well. Brad, I kind of want to get back to our final scores here. Has your score on The Aviator changed at all since 2019?
Nope. Love it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still at a wash for our revisits. I've not changed my scores any. I really love this movie. It stays at 10 out of 10 for me.
I will say, because I've seen this movie so many times now, like, there were a couple scenes where I was like, I could probably fast forward through this. But I don't think it's because the movie was boring. I think it's because I've seen it so many times that I have it like memorized at this point. I think if I was rating just this viewing, I'd probably bump it down to a 9.5. So if you want to split the difference, I could give it a 9 3/4, but we don't do that here.
Bob, I hate to tell you this. You gave it a 9.5.
Did I really?
You did. You gave it a 9.5 on your first
Well,
viewing.
then, hey, I'll stay consistent with that then. Because I do think that on this watch through, it was a 9.5 for me. I thought that I was averaging it against a 10, but now I know that I'm not. So I'll stick at a 9.5. I think that actually puts this in a really nice spot. It's a 9.75 average for us. I hope it inspires somebody to go out and watch this movie. Because to this day, I still think it's Leo's best performance.
Yeah, I was going to say, dude, we barely talked about Leo as a performer in this movie. Just go watch the movie. He is stunningly good in this film, and I still am just beyond understanding that he didn't win Best Actor this year.
Oh my gosh, that's another thing. We could do a whole episode just relitigating.
Yeah,
why didn't this win
honestly,
more awards?
Like you and I were texting about it, and you just said like Leo has spent so much of his career chasing an Oscar that like it almost. It doesn't like reflect poorly on him, but you can just tell in a lot of his movies, it almost feels like he's overacting a little bit to try and drag his way into an Oscar. And I do wonder, I'm like, if he had gotten this Oscar, he's 30 years old, he gets his Oscar, like, where does his career go? You know, does he dive into new territory? Does he challenge himself? I really don't know. I'd be fascinated to see it.
I think that's the thing that I really wish more of for him as he goes into, he's almost 50 now. He'll be 50 in a couple of years. I want him to do some fun stuff. Like, in the last decade, Tom Hanks is only batting 50% for good movies. But Tom Hanks looks like he's having the time of his life, and he's earned that right. And I think Leo has really just he spent so much time picking certain projects. And it's a double-edged sword because for the longest time, if Leo was in a movie you knew was going to be good. Like, they're just, the worst of those movies was the one he made with Clint Eastwood, ironically, called J. Edgar. And that was like a very transparent, please give me an Oscar. And that movie did not work at all. But when your worst movie is with a guy who's won 2 Best Picture Oscars and has a Best Director trophy on his mantle, you're doing pretty good. But the other side of that sword is man, if he had won for The Aviator, would we have seen him just do a cameo in some dumb comedy halfway through the decade? Yeah.
Dude, honestly, I was just thinking of Tom Cruise.
I was going to say that in Tropic Thunder. Yes.
Yeah.
I want Leo to just do something like that and have fun with it for a change.
Yeah, 100%, man. Bring on comedy Leo. I want to see him.
I mean, yeah, some people think Don't Look Up is comedy Leo, but I still think that's Please Give Me an Oscar Leo. So we'll see if he ever gets around to just doing something for fun without the expectation of a trophy. But until that day comes, The Aviator, absolute banger. If you have not seen it, you need to go watch it because it's a masterpiece. I'm really, really glad we got to talk about it a little bit more today, Brad.
Yeah. If you guys want to jump into the conversation, find us on Instagram, Facebook, or the cesspool that is Twitter, @FilmWhiskey.
Or you can jump into our Discord. We put a link to our Discord server in every one of our show notes. Brad and I are both on there every single day talking to listeners of this podcast about a myriad of topics. And The Aviator should be one of them. So we hope to see you there on Discord. We'll be back on Monday with another regularly scheduled episode. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.
This is The Aviator.
The revisit. God bless it.
The-
You didn't even do it with me.